We do thank you, our God, for this day, for the joy of being your people, of living in your world and exploring who you are and what you are doing, and that you gift us with exploring this world, that the sciences have the possibility of working in congruence with who you are and what you're doing and how we live in this world. So we pray your insights. We thank you for Thomas Torrance and the things that he explored and the things that he offered in this writing today. So bless our time, our conversations, and may you be glorified in all we do and say. We pray these things in your name. You who is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Very
Amen.
good.
Praise
So
God.
just a couple of notes. In Alistair McGrath's biography of T.F. Torrance, he notes the previous work that this work came from, which was given in 1990. And then he has these two essays listed in the biography in the back of this book. There's not much else said about it, only something that he's tapping into what Augustine was saying about the nature of theology as science, that there's a contribution that this article particularly looks to. So this is the first of 4 books called Facets of Faith and Science. The first volume, historiography, so that's the study of history, and modes of interaction. And it's particularly the modes of interaction between the nature of faith, theology, and the nature of science. What are they doing together? So there was a conference held in 1992, which I'm just looking in the preface here. The Pascal Center for Advanced Studies in Faith and Science undertook a 5-day research conference. So again, T.F. Torrance was one of the main speakers of this in 1992 for scholars and professionals interested in the relationship between science and belief. The objectives were to review the current state of scholarship on the nature of the interaction between the natural sciences and belief, and to identify research that promises new insights. These objectives were pursued along historical and philosophical lines, focusing on the relationship between Christian religious beliefs and the natural sciences. So it goes on from there. Both of the essays that we'll be looking at from T.F. Torrance are from the first volume. So the nature of the history of the relationship, how did theology and science come to be in conversation with one another, is at the core of what it is that we're trying to get at in this. And as you can see in reading, it was a long history, and the nature of the ongoing state of where it was in 1990, in many ways, was looking back at how did we come to distinguish and also work together with science and faith as that which can be seen together, that they need not be in competition, but that there is a learning that goes on within that. So something I often do with people is talk about clarifying by distinguishing, CBD, clarify by distinguishing. So that is where we're going to begin this article. So I just wondered, did anyone have anything you wanted to say about this article, having read it before we start? Sometimes there are questions or things that you're particularly interested in that would help guide what it is we get out of here. Were there any thoughts that anyone had?
Well, I might make a comment, if I
for it.
may. On page 145, I think, or is it 135? 135. Right before the first full paragraph, I think. Well, does the paragraph begin before we proceed further?
Yes, at the top of 135.
Down at the bottom of that, it says, hence the crucial point, the bottom of the paragraph, hence the crucial point in science must have to do with the intersection of the informal and the formal, the implicit and the explicit, or of
Specifiable.
Yeah, thanks, and unspecifiable factors. That is the point where we have to do with the transcendent role of wisdom and science. That is his specific purpose statement right there, right? Or
The whole nature of what we would call the theological or the realm of God, how do we bring that into language that the world of science can speak about, recognizing that not all of it can necessarily be said or described. You can't capture God in words, but you can refer to God or hear God as a speaking God who speaks to us. But we have to leave a level of unspecifiability, or we're trying to capture something that is not to be captured. But they work together. The nature of language, when you read a word on the page, it opens up for you something. And so the
Right.
tangibility of a word and the sciences give us words, but they refer to something. And so to say the nature of scripture, the nature of theology done well, it leads us to know the living God and to see that there is a congruence. The nature of what science does is study the world that God has made, that God is with and for, that is all still at work. So the intersection of the formal and the informal. So there again, the nature of both theology and science are they are formal disciplines that people do to study God, but the world of the informal, you can't reduce God to those forms.
Right. Well, that sentence, that is the point where we have to do with the transcendental role of wisdom in science.
Yeah.
That's what he's about in this essay, right? He goes on to say, for the rest of this chapter, I would like to spell out something of this transcendental role of wisdom
Yes.
in several important respects. And what exactly does he mean by transcendental role?
So to transcend is to go beyond.
Right?
And so the nature of what a word does for us, if you say Jesus, we have a word that is there to say a transcendental understanding means we can't capture him in the word, but the word refers to it. And he'll talk about the nature of the sciences, the nature of the word geology, is it points us into realms of the work that can be done. At some level, that which would be transcending within the world is something that the sciences particularly do. That which transcends within to the heavenly realms, that's more of a theological realm. So Ray Anderson's doctorate was historical transcendence and the reality of God. And so he's saying within human history, God transcends heaven and comes into the earthly sphere. So transcend, to go out beyond, can be God coming into the earthly sphere, into our history. And so to say the history of Jesus is the transcendence of God, and we transcend our history through Christ to participate in God's history. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand but so wisdom functions as the as a guide. Is that right?
Um,
That makes science possible and meaningful. Morally,
Guide might be one of the words that we use for it. To say that the nature of the sapiential literature in the Bible, the 5 books of poetry and wisdom are called the sapiential literature. To
right,
say that, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, they're in the Bible because they reveal to us God's wisdom that has come from God, though it comes through human writers, poets, and those who write what is there is an interface between God's wisdom and human wisdom that shows up in that wisdom literature. And I think that the nature of the role of wisdom in science is to say, if you say science, you can't leave out the divine dimension of that, or you've left out God's wisdom. Science must properly include God's wisdom, or it's not appropriate science.
okay.
I'm just
Marty,
not wanting to lose the personal dimension. Go ahead, Tim.
well, is it of help here that I was just going to put on the video? I think that's more social, isn't it? But is it of help here that the text? Can you hear me? Yeah,
Yes.
good. Oh, that the text itself leads us down the road of referring to systems and that we can't form. Yeah, I'm just asking, is this material relevant here? The fact that Torrance himself describes the inadequacies of trying to arrive at a totally specifiable kind of formal arrangement where there's always material beyond or transcending that which is of the kind of, I wasn't going to say here and now, but of the human finite understanding, which I thought was very useful if that's positive evidence for the controlling or the transcendent contingent order of God himself that lies beyond the earthly realm or something. But I'd never thought of what you're saying, that its transcendence is bi-directional. And I think that fills out, I think that's very interesting as well.
Yes.
But Marty, sorry, I'll shut up now. I've finished.
Yeah. The title, The Transcendental Role of Wisdom in Science,
right,
is particularly saying that there is something vis-a-vis, relation between wisdom and science, that wisdom is going to contribute to science. So he begins with these three authors, Augustine, Pascal, Polanyi. He's later going to talk also about Einstein, but in each case he gives a kind of a polarity of what is above, that which is referring to the nature of God, and also that which is below, that which is in our earthly sphere, and to recognize that science would like to separate out the divine sphere, that with the wisdom of God. And Torrance is just saying that's not good science. And we see that with Pascal and Michael Polanyi, that wasn't the case. And he's going to end the essay with saying, really, the work of Einstein couldn't give up on it. And he has some, quite overt statements on the need for the theological, the wisdom of God to give meaning to what it is that science is doing.
So it's not about what wisdom is, but how it functions across these disciplines.
So I'm going to read just another in the preface to this. There's a 1-paragraph statement on what Torrance is trying to do in this article. They've done just an introduction in going on. So T.F. Torrance analyzes how Augustine, Pascal, and Michael Polanyi understood the regulative role of the Christian faith in understanding nature. All three held that there were two constitutive aspects to every act of knowing, one about the objective reference of the objective reference of the mind to reality, which cannot be articulated, and the other about the conceptual content of knowledge, which can be articulated. Torrance argues that the first, that is, the believing mind, regulates the formal epistemic operations of the reasoning mind. This subtle relation between the believing and the reasoning mind applies both to knowing God and to knowing the world, including the objective order and unity in the universe, the moral obligation to assent to an immutable transcendent rational order, as the nature of God, and the hallmarks borne by the universe of a personal author. Torrance concludes that informed belief in God provides content for our intuition of the transcendent order which operates at the back of our minds in all scientific activity. Therefore, informed belief in God is the all-important regulative principle in scientific discovery and in all formalization and handling of rational and moral law.
And in that very first paragraph, he writes, it arises when the eye of the human mind discerns an invisible transcendent realm of immutable eternal truth, upon which all scientia of the truths of the visible corporal realm gained through the rational operations of the human reason are ultimately contingent.
Yes.
So I like that. The eye of the human mind discerns an invisible transcendent realm
Yeah.
of the
Marty, what page was that from that you were reading from?
So
That's the
that was
first
it's from the beginning of this book from which the essay we're reading is taken.
Oh,
And so
it-
that appears in it is called the general introduction. And so
oh, right.
the editor of this book has gone through and done a 1 paragraph kind of summary on the intent of what each of the authors is attempting to do in this book. And
Oh,
the
thanks.
person who wrote that is
Yeah,
that person there
Yeah.
is the editor. He wrote
Yeah,
this general introduction. And he's
Yeah.
the person who gathered the conference to come together.
Yes, it sounded good. Thanks.
Yes, Howard.
Um, hopefully this isn't a rabbit trail, but if I can throw out
We like
something,
rabbits. Rabbits are good.
the my major emphasis in my Old Testament masters was wisdom literature.
Okay.
And the one thing that came out is that wisdom is ultimately based on creation. Whereas when you deal with apocalyptic and prophetic, you're dealing with revelation directly. But when you start with wisdom, the idea is that you're basing it on creation, that there is a structure to the world. But even more importantly, Proverbs 1:7, the beginning of wisdom is what? Is fear of the Lord. So
Yeah.
if you don't have that aspect, you're really missing, I think, the whole purpose of the discussion of wisdom. So
And
for
I
what
just
that's
wouldn't
worth,
I wouldn't use the word that wisdom literature is based in creation. I would say it applies to creation. It's the wisdom of God that applies to
it
creation.
wasn't
Therefore,
based in, it was based on that the idea that the world was created by God
okay,
and it has a structure and can be understandable.
okay,
And
yeah,
then that
the
leads into
orderliness, yeah, yeah. It's funny how a little word like "on" can be taken different ways.
yes. But no, if you would say in, I would disagree with you. Along with you, I would disagree that that's not correct. But
Yeah.
That two-letter preposition means a lot there.
Yeah. So again, this group met because they were, as Carrie Magruder said, these were the finest scholars in the relationship of theology and science that were available in the early 90s, which was a time rich in the conversation of theology and the sciences. Why it diminished from there, I don't know. Young Il, you may have a better sense from the scientific side. Why? I mean, there are still people who are writing. You still have, Polkinghorne and others who are doing things. Alistair McGrath's retiring. Is there somebody to take his place there at Oxford? I don't know that there is. So to say,
I think
go ahead.
to me, it seems like the role of science itself has become diminished. The idea that there is truth to be discovered
Mm-hmm.
has become relativized in the postmodern
Right.
ethos. And so people are interested in using things like technology
Yes.
as opposed to understanding
Mm.
the truth, which is underlying science. And so when you don't have that high view of science, then the conflict supposedly with religion is not really relevant, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you don't care really about truth. You just care about pragmatically. To me, it seems like that's the
Yeah. No,
situation.
I think so. To say the nature of the state of knowledge in the world generally, and in science and in theology particularly, and the challenge of churches to be able to get people to want to know and to follow the truth over against what seems to be an inclination of people wanting to do things their own way, the nature of individualism and all those things in the West that are particularly challenging for the nature of the churches, and as you're saying, for science as well. So one of the things, just to affirm here, T.F. Torrance is making an argument that's not out of date. The argument is still needed, and that is there is truth. It begins in the nature of the wisdom of God, and that the nature of the sciences, when they work humbly to serve God in the world, have an appropriate place, when they are merely reduced to humans using them, then the nature of the motive of those who use those sciences can be problematic. As for those who just use Christianity for their own ends, is the same problem. It says church on the outside, but it can just be something to serve human ends and not really become those who pursue wisdom, revealed the nature of God in the person of Christ or the rest of Scripture. So I think your insights are really helpful there, Young Il. It is part of the postmodern move that they've abandoned something. So what T.F. Torrance is saying in this is it's vital for the revitalization of both theology and the sciences. They both need revitalization. There isn't what used to be maybe a domination of the sciences over theology, and before that, a domination of theology over the sciences, but that now both of them are, in a sense, they have lost a ground of standing to bring humanity into truth statements that serve God and serve humanity, and to say the world is fracturing with those losses. Right?
Yes. Yeah, I think also, I think there is a loss of confidence in the hard science like physics, because physics has not come up with anything significant in the last, let's say, 50 years. It seems like physicists themselves are navel gazing to say, what are we doing? How come we don't have any breakthroughs comparable to the early 20th century? That it's a kind of, they're kind of wondering, trying to figure out what the next steps are.
Yeah.
Like the unification relativity with quantum mechanics, for example, it's just not working. There's no, and to me, personally, I think it's a matter of scale. It may be that it'll take 500 years for us to get to the next unification. And so we can't be in too much of a rush, right?
Yeah.
That science is only 400 and 500 years old anyways, modern science. So to me, we need to take a long perspective. And that's where I think this idea of wisdom that Torrance is talking about, the underlying, ethos, I mean, not so much ethos, the underlying principles like order, unity, and all that, that's what needs to help us maintain that trajectory, right? Instead of just giving up because it's too hard, right?
Yeah.
So
in the same way, giving up on the church it's unfortunate that so many people are giving up on churches. I was just back in Philadelphia, and to see, empty churches, huge churches that would seat 1,000 people, where 10 people come on a Sunday. And it's like, wow, there's something tragic here.
Except,
well, Europe has gone through that for the
Europe's
last
got that same thing,
many decades, right? They become kind of the state
Post-Christian.
religion. Yes, post-Christian.
it's interesting, though, that the Orthodox Church, specifically the Antiochian Orthodox Church, is growing.
Yes.
The local pastor here said it's an unusual growth in single young men.
And I wonder if there isn't just a sense of a solidity of truth that one feels in an Orthodox church that's part of the sense that people are looking for something they can just believe in. It doesn't feel that it's just wishy-washy or swept away or anything like that.
I think that has a lot to do with it. That Thomas Torrance said it's the most biblical form of worship.
Yeah.
And he said that to a bunch of Reformed churchmen as well as the Orthodox.
Right.
I bet it got his attention. But Augustine here makes a good beginning, doesn't he?
Yes. And we'll just, and again, just to say there's an introduction that goes from 131 to 135, where basically he takes 3 different people to use different language to kind of make the same point. And then he will go into the methodology of the nature of the recognition of order, the nature of the discernment of unity, the ethical dimension. So we'll take a few minutes to just go through these opening three people to make sure that we're aligned with what it is that he's saying. So he recognizes that Augustine has this distinction between sapientia and scientia. By scientia, he refers to the unique insight that arises. Sapientia, he means the unique insight that arises when the eye of the human mind discerns, so it's a discerning process, an invisible, transcendent realm of immutable, eternal truth, and then that's going to be upon which. So to say, wisdom, the word wisdom, sapientia, is that our minds have this capacity to recognize the truthfulness of things and that it comes from something beyond ourself. And that the nature of what will be identified as we look at things and recognize that order comes at some level from what wisdom brings to us, which again, the word intuition is going to come into play, I think, in relation to this, to see and intuit there's something going on here. And when you walk into a room and you say, there's something going on here, you're intuiting the order of where people are, what they're talking about, the mood of the room. So again, there's a kind of a practical wisdom that sees things that are going on that one can't just say that it's just the objects that have that. There's something that is a deeper kind of ordering that is going on, and wisdom helps us to see that. So to say the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon or the preacher says, I've tried all of these things out to find meaning. And so there's a quest for meaning there, and the human experience of all those things that one would propose might give meaning are found wanting. And so in the end, there's this reverence for God, just don't worry about all that stuff. Fear God, reverence God, that becomes the eye of the mind that sees what is meaningful for life, that I think corresponds to what's going on here. So scientia, or science, that deals with the truth of visible, corporeal, the bodily, the things we can see and touch, gained through the rational operations of the human reason. So the rational operations of the human reason, he's not saying it here, but I'm going to suggest a McMurrian kind of thing. When you act in the world, you recognize that there are things that have certain patterns, so that you can walk through a doorway, but you can't walk through the wall. Right? So for McMurray, that's his illustration of we act in the world and we come to know the patterns of the world, and you recognize I can go here, I can't go there. This becomes what he calls reason. Next time, I'm not going to walk into the wall, I'm going to go through the doorway.
Well, how is that compared to tacit knowledge of Polanyi?
The tacit knowledge of Polanyi, it ties to it. Tacit knowledge is, there is a more specific knowledge. Once you have walked through the doorway or walked into the wall once, then you know the wall hurts your nose. And so you might say it becomes tacit knowledge. McMurray doesn't use that. He's wanting to build a sense that the emotional sense of I can go here and I can't go there is the foundation of what we call being reasonable. The experience is actually creating our reason. Therefore, his book, Reason and Emotion, he would say the emotional sense of being able to go through the door or not go through a door gives us an emotional experience that then we go, oh, next time I'm going to do this. And that's what we call reason.
Oh, that would be like picking up a cat by its tail. You do it once.
You do it once. So he goes through and talks even about, when a child is born, they don't have the ability to discern those things. So they need persons, mothers, fathers, who help them to discern what it is to live in the world. There comes a point where they're able to, to hold up, do you want the water or the milk or the juice? I want that one. And so McMurray says, now the discerning process is coming down. And when we get where we can just say the word milk or juice, they say milk. Now we have put to language something that is our experience of the corporal world. and we're bringing it to language so that we can communicate with words. And so that's the science part, right? Science is born when language identifies for us so that we can distinguish the nature of that which is other. Mama, dada, that's science, right? But it's based on a wisdom. I want mama, I don't want dada. Or I want dada, I don't want mama. Depends on who's in a good mood or a bad mood, maybe. But so to say that even there, the foundation of, what is wisdom doing for us? It's helping us to learn how do we make the choices of those things that bring value, that engage us with reality, and the science is serving that at some level. And so the role of wisdom in science is it helps us to find how to engage, deal with, and make choices that align with wisdom to live in the world. And our reasoning is merely the language and the experiences that we bring to bear on how we make the decisions to engage, what it is we engage, how we engage it, and all those other things. Did I lose you, or are you okay? You're good with that?
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting, the tying together of wisdom and the tacit dimension. I had
Yes.
never considered that way, but it seems like Torrance is viewing wisdom as sort of the invisible underlying
Yes.
sense of order and things like that that we have. And of course, ultimately that comes from God.
Yes.
But that kind of, the faith aspect of it that is not yet articulated, right?
Yes.
And then once it's articulated, then it becomes scientific, as you have said,
Yeah.
because we now have conceptualized it, whereas tacitly we think there's something there, but we're not sure. And so we kind of are groping around. Whereas the traditional sense of wisdom is, knowing what to do as
Yes.
opposed to how things are done, which is
Yes.
science, right? But here he's using the word wisdom in a much more, I don't know, interesting way, I thought. Yeah.
Yeah. And tacit is part of that, I think. I think that there are many nuances that we want to pick up here. I would also say that faith is science. When you know
Hmm.
that you can trust the nature of who God is and what he's made, that trusting moment, I choose this and not to follow these other people who are saying things, that is a scientific reflection on the nature of the faithfulness of God and not the faithfulness of humans who are running with agendas that only serve themselves. Right? So
Hmm.
faith seeking understanding can
Yeah.
be, you could say, science seeking understanding and mean the same thing. And it can deal with the nature of God, or it can deal with the nature of relationships with people with whom you engage, that it would be true in all of those cases. So faith is much more consistent with the pursuit of truth and those things that we hold to shape our lives in relation to that which is other us, than what we often lose at just thinking, oh, it's just faith, as though there
Hmm.
was no solidity to. I choose this because it's trustworthy. I choose this person
Right.
because they're faithful.
Right.
Right. So the nature of human reason then is contingent, so that the nature of the world as we find it, there's a contingency of the fact that God comes in the person of Jesus means we have the contingent ability to know God because God has made himself known in the person of Christ.
Hmm.
That's contingency. God needed to speak to us so that we would know who God is and what God is saying to us. And we need faithful churches. This is Bill's point on the Orthodox Church. We need churches who have stability and faithfulness and truthfulness. And then we will be able to say, these people, they have an understanding of community and who God is honoring of God and one another. And those are the contingencies of having a faith in that body of people.
It's not just the Orthodox Church. You take a church like Alistair Begg's church here in Cleveland. It's every Sunday, it's just unbelievably populated. The congregation is huge, and his is not alone. There are other grace churches here that are very well attended. It's the traditional old church, the Presbyterian USA churches, the other mainstream churches that are slowly dying on the vine.
Yes. Yeah.
They're,
Hmm.
I guess, the closest one that is, well, I was about to say beg, but I'll take that back. It's
Okay.
the mainstream churches that are empty.
Yeah.
Why
And
is that?
it's
Why is
tragic. Why is that?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that the nature of the presence of the living God, as I say, to walk out of a church service and say, I don't know who it was speaking over there, but God spoke to me. That there is something of the authenticity of the experience of the body of Christ, the preaching of the word, that people feel like it wasn't just me there. God had something to say to me today, and he used those people in that place to do it. And I think a
Yeah, and
lot of
I think too, the music, the worship music is different than you take Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church in New York City. I mean, a choir, a robe choir, old
Yeah.
hymns, old worship order, that whole thing. They do live stream, and they're not very well populated in the summer, for instance. But here, Alistair Begg's church is packed. Packed. He must have, I don't know how many hundreds of people in there, maybe 1,000. I don't know. It's scary.
Yeah.
It's so big. Yeah. Every Sunday.
Marty,
Yes, Tim.
could I ask you a question? I don't know whether
Yes.
this is appropriate. I think it probably is at this time, but it's to do with the significance of contingents.
Yes.
Do you, you know, the way you can be avaricious for more and more of the truth, and you can get into kind of book mode, or I do, and you want to kind of take on more and more and more. Well, the more I center my thoughts on contingents, the notion of contingents, the more I'm beginning to realize that as avaricious or greedy as, sorry, I've nearly finished. Am I doing okay?
You're doing
I've
fine.
nearly finished. Yeah, as greedy as as avaricious as one is to learn more and more, is it the case, do you think, that in the in the creation we're in, and the new creation that we will fully be in whenever it arrives, as it were, that we will never get to the bottom of all that there is to know, because that's of the essence of contingents? I'm sorry, Bill, if this doesn't directly fit in with your stream directly, but I just it's not that I wanted to change the tone or the level. It's just that this has been bugging me for some time about how if this is my conclusion, I don't know what yours, but that if there is forever more and more and more to know, that we might, and this is going to go on for in perpetuity, as it were, or whatever time zone we're in the new creation, then we can enter into a kind of phase of relaxation and enjoy the journey, if I'm being idiomatic or cliched about it, because there's always going to be more and more. So we might as well just take each day's increment or duration as a kind of gift, and just sort of relax into the fact that this God we in part know is incredibly intriguing, and it's going to go on and on and on and on and on. Or is that rubbish, what I'm saying?
No, I think the nature of contingents and mystery is to say the mystery of God revealed in the person of Christ says that we will never tire of discovering more and more of the nature of the one who has come to us. And to say has come to us means that our knowledge is contingent on that one. And he takes us into understanding the depths of the mystery of God, which there's no end to the depth of that mystery, and the nature of the story that we call the story of Scripture, Old and New Testament. The nature of understanding the contingency of how God worked in times and seasons and places and different types of literature to reveal the nature of the kingdom that has come. And the kingdom that has come and is coming has a contingency to it. And so the nature of the desire to ever delve into the mysteries of God is to pursue the contingency of what is there. And to use Carrie Magruder's sense, if you take a good geologist, they'll take a mountain apart and keep trying to figure out more and more, what's happening and how is this formed? It's the delight of discovery that the contingencies are ever inviting of more.
Yeah. And so open-endedness towards the more and more and more isn't a naivety. That aspect of knowing is real. That it's a continually knowing more, and it
Yep.
really is ongoing.
Yeah, it is. It is the nature of the study of Scripture is that throughout your life you will study it, and you will probably keep seeing new things because you see things newly. And it was ever there. And if you have good friends, you keep seeing things as you go through life with them that you didn't see or didn't know, and it adds to the depth of the relationship that is there. And so there is a sense in which, time and space with God, with other humans, with the world, all of them have this invitation to discover the word that is, you use the word that's in the first sentence of the next paragraph. Fundamental to Augustine's conception of sapientia is that it is a gift.
Yeah. And that will that be an inexhaustibility of new knowledge, both in this creation and whatever dimensions we live in the new creation. Presumably, we can expect the same sort of.
The simple answer is yes.
Inexhaustibility. The inexhaustibility in whatever new arrangement we find ourselves in. So I better get used to the fact that we know in part, and we'll go on only knowing in part.
It's an Einsteinian concept that I borrow: to proceed with wonder. Our whole life should be a proceeding with wonder. I've used this in teaching in the Bible. Don't go in trying to master it. Let it keep opening you up to wonder.
And I wonder as I wander.
Out under the sky.
So it's a mountaintop vista that we never actually necessarily arrive at. But thank you.
Mountains and valleys and deserts and oceans. It's on and on and on. The scope is unending, so it should be the greatest delight and joy and discovery. That's why we should never get bored.
No.
So just looking a little bit beyond here then in this next paragraph. So again, we're with Augustine. So this passive form of knowing. So passive means I'm not active in it. There's something that comes to me. So to just open your eyes and look, there's already something that is coming that is there. So it's not the same thing as the door wall, and yet it is in the same sense that you see it there. And so there's this beginning to discern the gift of the there-ness of creation, or the gift of another. And how often do we just walk by somebody and not see them as gift? And they're just an object walking by. But if you stop and say, hey, who are you? Do I know you? And then you have a conversation, you didn't know them before, but as they begin to tell their story, they become interesting because there is this seeing them as gift that receives with openness who they are. And the insight that it involves is not something that we generate by ourselves. It's an openness to the there-ness of God, the there-ness of the world. It is a formless, transitory intuition. So here's introducing the word intuition of what is intransitory. So the word sapientia, wisdom, and intuition for Torrance are going to be highly tied together. So the nature of having our intuitions trained is something. My wife's a dentist, and she said, the day that you graduate, they say you're a safe learner now. right? It's not that you know everything, but you're safe enough to go out and not hurt people, but you're
Oh,
going to need to use your intuition with each case that comes to ask, how do I best deal with this person? Did you want to say something, Bill?
well, that sentence that you just started
Yes.
is interesting as it goes on. And
Yeah,
as
we're going to
such,
keep.
cannot be conceptualized in explicit terms. For no sooner does the eye of the mind discern the realm of eternal realities than its glance rebounds from it, and thus does not rest upon it or lock into it. Well, whatever happened to ponderation, to pondering? I
I
mean,
think
this is
that is.
like
I think that
wisdom
ponder
is
is what he would.
passive. He's speaking about a wisdom is passive, it's a transitory glance. It can't rest
So
upon its object. Is that what it's saying?
I think if we keep reading the paragraph, we'll see that he doesn't stop there, but it's the beginning
Yeah.
point.
On the other hand, he goes on the other hand. Yeah.
it's the katafusin that we need to recognize we don't make it up. We're not making this up, folks. You know, whether it's in science or in faith, we're not making it up. We receive the gift of that which is other ourself and begin to, and I like your word, to ponder, what is this? How do I understand it? And with persons, we can say, tell me about yourself, tell me your story. And that is a pondering that sees the other as a gift, which is a profound theological starting point. And again, with the nature of the nature of Christ is to say, we don't just say, what do you have for me? How can you make my life better? Because then we're just trying to fit Jesus into our boxes. Rather, he is the door that
Yeah.
opens us to what life looks like. And so we say, tell me who you are. Where are you taking me? Well, I'm going to bring you to my Father who is your Father. He sent me to bring you home. And I'm going to send my Holy Spirit. And he's going to lead you into, and we'll use the word wisdom here, all wisdom by leading you to my Father and to learn from me and to be in community. That's what the Spirit's going to do. Now, the whole nature of the passivity has become an active invitation of indwelling. We'll use the Polanyian term. Now we're indwelling the gift, right? And so pondering, indwelling, exploring, these are all words to say that the nature of faith and of science are both profoundly exploratory and best done in community,
Yeah.
right? And what it is we're studying isn't just one another or our mind's eye. We're studying what our mind's eye sees. So intuition is part of that. No sooner does the eye of the mind discern the realm of external realities than its glance rebounds from it and thus does not rest upon it or lock. So it doesn't get fixed. Doesn't become petrified. Our knowledge isn't petrified. It's dynamic and moving and active. On the other hand, he says, the transient, the moving insight thus given is committed to the memory, which thereafter prompts the mind to return to its fleeting glimpse of the transcendent order as its guiding star in determining the rational patterns of the created or contingent order of things. So to say your eyes look out and see, and they start making a map. Oh, there's this, and oh, this is good to eat, and that's not good to eat, and oh, this time of day we can do things, and this time of the day it's too dark. Our mind starts mapping the nature of reality. It locks in, and we call that memory. So McMurray calls this reflection. We engage the world, we engage day and night, we engage things that taste good and things that don't. And so we reflect, and that reflection becomes something that isn't just a momentary reflection, it's the gathered reflection that becomes rationality. And so the nature of the use of T.F. Torrance of John McMurray, that to have rational minds is to be katafusin. We are engaged in knowing the world according to the way that is presented and to keep discovering. And the rationality of it then leads us to make choices in the light of that, which wisdom allows us to make choices then. Don't do things that will hurt you. Don't do things that hurt other people, right? But now you've got this map that's been made to know what your options are in those things. And so to say the nature of what McMurray said in Theological Science, where it talks about love being at the core of the rational world. When you love somebody, you are motivated to not only map them, but to also act in relation to them in a way that builds the love. Right. And if you act in a way that's inconsistent or not loving towards them, then your rationality is irrational. Right? Because it's not appropriate to the nature of the object of your study. So to be able to say yes in a loving, relating kind of way to persons or the world, if you destroy the world that you find, destroy your environment, it's not a loving thing and it's irrational.
Yes, your reason has become unhinged with the real being.
That's
Yes.
right. That's right. So we're weaving together here then the nature of the work of reality, the map in our mind, the rationality that it presents to us, and then how we engage with it. And for Augustine, there is the sense that God is the one who gives us this capacity to see, to understand, to begin to map, and to engage the world as it is. When we look just at the world, that may become science, but Torrance is here arguing science without wisdom doesn't know how to love. It just sees the standing trees. We can use that. Let's cut it all down. It's like, just a minute here. That's holding our hillside in place. The hillside is going to wash away and destroy our village. I mean, the wisdom that comes adds to science's ability to engage the world as it is in ways appropriate to the nature of God and what it means to love and care for one another as well. So rational patterns then, to say the nature of patterns, Augustine saw that when we look at waves or clouds or whatever we have, there are patterns of how reality works that our memory holds up, and we say, I've seen this before. I've seen this wet stuff coming down, and it's rain, and it looks like when it falls on the ground, plants grow. Okay, what's that about? And so the patterns of the days, the times, the seasons, what's there in the world, all these things we begin to see the gift of what is there and reflect on it, and then we can relate to it in a particular kind of way. But knowing that they are plants and they are growing, are animals that need food, that is all a wisdom that we see what they need, and our science logs them all in place so that we can identify plant, animal, human, food, fire. Be careful. Right? So it is only sapientia, it is only when sapientia is informed by divine revelation and grasped by faith that it can be given explicit, formal content as to the intellectual cognition or eternal invisible realities, in contrast to scientia or the rational cognition of temporal and corporeal realities. So if you just look out and see forest and trees, then you'll just see forest and trees. But if you say God created the forests and the trees, they are a gift of shade and resources, and to wonder at the mystery and majesty of God who makes trees, the divine reality of these are created living things as well, creates a kind of respect or honoring that is honoring God, where wisdom then comes into play as the recognition of the theological dimension of reality as it comes to us, gift. Are we good with that so far?
Yeah.
So we've got the eternal and the temporal here for Augustine are just providing something. It's a little bit Platonic potentially. Plato, saw real realities in the world of ideas or the eternal, and we simply have temporal manifestations. So there is an eternal form of the chair. I don't know why the chair always gets used, but there's an eternal form of the chair, and we just have different manifestations of that eternal form. Augustine is often called Platonic, Neoplatonic in his thinking, because the real reality is somewhere out there. So Torrance is not going to say that we default to a Platonic way of thinking, but we are recognizing that the world of ideas and the world of the forms of things we see in front of us are connected. And we need to maintain that connection. If you just say there is no eternal, there's just the stuff in front of us, then you have what is called the Enlightenment, where people said, we don't need God anymore. We just need to be able to manage and control the world as we find it. We are enlightened. We'll do it ourselves from here. That's science without wisdom. And there's a little bit of that around.
Uh-huh.
So Augustine then points out what a measure of sapientia operates apart from faith. It is evident in the discernment of the necessary principles of mathematics, but he also claims that while sin does not affect the validity of science in temporal things, it does have effect on the sapientia, or the wisdom, impairing the ability to relate knowledge, God's way of things, knowledge of temporal truths, to the eternal ground on which they depend. So the nature of sin, it separates the wisdom of God and our perception and management of the temporal world. So there's the fracturing that is there. So to say, for Augustine, the very definition of separating science and faith is, in a sense, what sin is. So while humans do not have to be believers in order to engage in scientific knowledge, they do need wisdom to relate what they learn of the principles of nature to their ultimate ground in the immutable, rational, and moral order, by reference to which all temporal realities are regulated, and in the light of which, therefore, their basic rational and moral judgments to be made. So if you live in the world, you live with other human beings. I mean, if you just see everybody as an object, you'll become immoral. If you just see math as something to measure how many bodies are in the room and not see that they're persons, then math will have lost its ground in the reality that we're dealing with. You will have detached your relationship to the world that the appropriate kinds of sciences will give us, and you've devalued it, dehumanized it at all in ways that become destructive. Not that that would ever happen. Go ahead.
Oh, just to say, I think Torrance is very helpful there in showing the negative bias that can accompany the mathematically minded person, which I found quite interesting. He gives another example about the more personal, intuitive minded discipline. I can't remember which was that. The not, i.e., the non-mathematical subjects and so on.
Yeah.
He seemed to sort of refer to kind of the mathematical mind as a kind of a pitfall. I thought it was just a caricature what he was talking about, but he actually takes serious. He's giving serious air or example to the fact that the mathematically minded can lose that very what did you call it, the link to reality, because they've gone down the symbolic or formal impersonal route. And I'd love to hear I'd like to be reminded of that, and love to hear of any more of these disciplinary distortions that get in the way of the coordination of faith and reason, or whatever couplet is going on here, more and more, so that what's coming out in this paper gets really etched in your brain, so that you kind of never forget. You don't have to rehearse this again and again, kind of thing. So that example is one of the way in which it's really embeds itself in your memory, because it's so useful to, as a non-formal, logical, mathematically employed person, or non-mathematician. It's very helpful to know what the occupational hazards of some of these areas are that can otherwise seem quite what's the word, abstruse, awkward, or
Yeah.
you know, for laymen and non-professional people like myself. Yeah,
These were
thank you.
professionals, of course, that he was speaking to, but I think he lays out the grounds
Yeah,
upon which to build these things. So everything that he's doing here and always
yeah,
does is this problem of dualism, which is to break the world into merely the world of ideas or thoughts and the world of physics as two separate things, and to operate with one or the other. And so he's certainly laying out that foundation here, that in all things, the wholeness of who God is, the nature of God's creation and care of reality is going to be a foundational thought for all of the work he does in faith and science.
yeah. Marty, do you find these papers will be very helpful in the synthesis that you're making for the Series 1 and Series 2, Science and Theology, under the editorship of Torrance, that you've been through with us exhaustively? Do you find the cement or glue or cohesions that are coming through on some of these papers, given the fact that they're of the same time period as some of the books, or am I going off beam asking
well,
you?
theological science was 1969, so we're 20 years later.
Sorry, not theological science, but the follow-up edited books that we went through in the Science and Theology series with Carver, you, Nebel Sick, and the other authors that you've been beavering away at. Is some of the stuff here going to cross-fertilize?
It does cross-fertilize, and actually footnote 17 refers to one of those 12 books.
Yeah. So I just wondered, were you getting a lot of cross-fertilization between this conference and those books I've just mentioned?
They interrelate. There's so much material that I'm still sifting and sorting and getting all those pieces together. But yes, this is helpful. And Carrie Magruder, when I was there at the University of Oklahoma, suggested this be one of the first things that I read, because it crystallizes the nature of T.F. Torrance's own orientation, the role that he was playing in the state of science and faith at that time, just after that series of books was written. So there is certainly a connection between them that I think is appropriate. Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see how that comes out then. Thank you.
I can't wait to see it when I'm done. So the nature of the eternal temporal, moving on to Pascal, he's going to again have this, what Torrance will call polarity, that there's two parts that should not be separated. If we make them poles, then we have done something that is two breaking apart of them. So something like this Augustinian distinction between an inchoate sapientia and a conceptualized scientia, science and wisdom, was put forward in the 17th century Blaise Pascal. So we're quite a few centuries later. The polar relation between, and again, I don't speak French, but the spirit of de finesse and spirit of geometry, I think he's going to go on and see those as basically intuition and geometry, the heart and reason. They represent two contrary but complementary ways of approaching truth. So contrary but complementary. Now, one of the things that I think is missed in the Bible a lot is the nature of heart, revealing to the heart of God, the heart of Jesus, the heart of the community, the heart of the person. As God's holy and beloved people, put on a heart of compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. That's Colossians 3, starting verse 12. Heart is something that Pascal is using here in a way that Torrance is seeing as tied to wisdom. So be those whose very being and living and making choices in life receives the wisdom of God, so that your own hearts are living in a particular kind of way. And then the geometrical mind, and Jung Il, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the nature of the geometrical mind is to say there are ways that we can bring the lines and the angles and the points, we can bring these things together and put them into words, that the nature of the metaphorical sense of engaging the real world as geometry does. also is another dimension of how we engage the world, so that a heart to know how to build a building and then the ability to bring the geometry of the building together are dimensions that need to be held together. Am I appropriately using the word geometry there, do you think?
Actually, I've been wondering about his use of the word geometric mind a little bit too.
Yeah.
But if he's using it in the sense of like the way geometry is taught in a, then I think that is kind of the epitome of that rationality that's made
Okay.
explicit. Yeah.
Yeah. A rationality that really pertains to the world as we see it. It's not an abstract.
Right.
It's something that it is like words. They're not the thing itself, and yet they give us the ability to construct in our mind what it is we're talking about.
Right.
Right. So the intuitive mind takes in first principles at once as a whole, though not through an analytical or deductive process, in other words, not from the human, and thereby provides the geometrical mind with the first principles on which, in the last resort, it must rely on in its demonstrative operations, but which it cannot itself supply. So the intuitive mind looks at the situation or God or what are we studying, and comes up with seeing the patterns and the times and the seasons and the openness of the universe or a situation, and begins to provide the mind the ability to fit them together in a way that is katafusan, or it's implied by the nature of the thing itself, begins to shape or form our geometry so that we get an appropriate application to what is going on in front of us. So this quote at the end there, reason's last step is the recognition that there is an infinite number of things which are beyond it. It is merely feeble if it does not go as far as that. So there's a humility in wisdom that it wants to give to reason. And the quote, it's not, I don't quote exactly as Pascal did, but the heart has reasons that reason does not know. There you see the heart has a kind of something that's like reason, but it sees more intuitively. And so to see the face of a person or to hear their words and to be listening, what are they meaning by this? That's the heart listening in an intuitive way and applying the nature of language as it's used to try and get at what it is that is going on. And so to say, when you understand, then the relationship and the conversation has been reasonable. When people hear the Bible preached and they don't hear a lot of names and places and words they don't understand, if it's all not understandable, then it just doesn't make any sense. And so the nature of the geometrical mind has not had the points of contact that it needs for the reading of scripture to make sense. But when we have Jesus revealed, telling a story or acting in a particular way, and people see or hear that, they sense the heart of Jesus, reflecting the heart of his Father, and their hearts are touched. And we could even use Wesley's statement, their hearts are strangely warmed. Right? That's the intuitive that's reforming the mind to be conformed to the nature of the work and actions of a living God in the world. So strictly then, these two approaches from the heart and from the mind should be combined in an open-ended conception and use of the human reason. So we as humans are to be faithful scientists, and faithful not just to science, but faithful to God and faithful to our science. Does that make sense? They're held together. Nevertheless, Pascal points out it is rare for intuitive people to be mathematicians. So if you're right-brained, you often get frustrated with left-brained people, would be another way of saying that. Everything detail without getting the big picture, that's hard.
I have a little objection to this assertion, but that's me.
You can object, that's okay. That's part of the learning. Are you
Because
a
I
right brain
think,
or a left brain? Are you a right or left brain person?
oh, you see, that's the thing.
Right.
I'm not
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
I hope I'm both to some
Yeah.
extent because
And we are both. That's the
yeah,
master and his emissary. He says we are always both, but
yes,
sometimes we put one in front of the other a bit, but it's always both are being employed. And if we don't have right brain, we won't see the big picture. And if we won't use the left brain, we'll miss all the details and we'll mess up the. So they each have a
exactly.
value in conversation. And I think that's where this whole thing is going too, by the way.
Yes, yes, I think so. It's just that his Pascal saying that a mathematician, can't be intuitive and intuitive people are not mathematicians. It's like, I don't know. I think mathematicians are very intuitive
Yeah.
because they have to come up with new concepts, new ideas. And how do you do that, right? So there's
My
that
intuitions
give
would
and
say
take.
that's true.
Yes.
Well,
Even if my reason says,
what was what kind of
Well,
mathematician was Einstein?
he was not really a mathematician.
Right, right.
Yeah.
He was more intuitive, right?
Oh, yeah. He
Yeah.
had the help of mathematicians
Yeah.
to do to his formulation. But I mean, he was brilliant in the sense that he acquired knowledge of the complex math so that he could use it. But he
Yes.
wouldn't have been able to develop it himself. That would have just, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So where we use it with Augustine, science and wisdom, here we're going to go for heart and reason. And we're
Right.
going to recognize that these things are going to carry over. And we could use Ian McGilchrist's The Master and His Emissary. The master is the right brain, and his emissary that brings all the details is the left brain. So it wants to go the other way, and when you do, it becomes problematic. But there's a sense of point of reference and what comes first, which he goes on to at the top of 133. It would be absurd, Pascal remarks, to define light in terms of light. We need the words, the reasoning, to
Mhm.
have the actuality that is intuited for that to make sense, or to explain some word by the very same word. So he's going to go on and just talk about there needs to be a reference. This becomes important just in the nature of the use of words. There has to be a reference to which our words can point. So this is going to be the main point, or one of the main points he picks up from Polanyi, which he goes on to then on 133. It is in basic agreement with these Augustinian and Pascalian concepts that Michael Polanyi has done so much today to clarify the foundation of knowledge, which had suffered from an unbalanced attention to the impersonal. It's only the thinginess of the world and not the personalness of the world, which is abstractive and analytical of thought. He has shown us that there are two constitutive aspects to every act of knowing: an inarticulate aspect, in which we have to do with the objective reference to the mind to reality. So that's the intuitive, the tacit dimension. There's
Mhm.
more there than our words or our minds can say, right? And then
Yes.
there's the articulate aspect, and that is the words, the concepts that we put out there and put them into words or graphs or whatever we do to help do a picture. Even a map would be that articulate.
Mhm.
um, the idea of looking out at the ocean and saying, I understand everything that's under the surface, is like, no, you don't. All you can see is the surface, and that's it. We are all just skipping rocks on a huge amount, and our intuition is just rock skippers.
Mhm.
Um, so the nature then of the ability to say what we see beyond merely object is the personal, is where he's ultimately going to end up on the very last page. The nature of what we do as scientists, what we do as theologians, is to enter as persons, in the case of theology, into the personhood of God, and in the case of the world that's created, to see it as God's creation, is a theology of nature, which is not natural theology. On page 134, the first full paragraph, the central point in Michael Polanyi's philosophy of science, to which I wish to draw attention, is that all scientific concepts and formalizations comprise both definable and indefinable factors. In other words, the world is a mystery. We're not going to give up, but we're going to keep saying what can be said and letting ourselves learn and live into intuitively what we can't capture with our words. The next paragraph, in a strictly formalized knowledge, we rely upon an element of unformalized knowledge, which means that we cannot use formal statements alone, cut off from the informal assumptions that regulate their function. This is certainly true meeting any person. You are male, you are female, you are somewhere between 55 and 60. They're all true statements. They just don't allow us the intuitive dimension of hearing the story and getting to know the person in all the not definable kinds of ways that would then qualify for knowing the person. And for those who just hear Christianity as a set of rules, if you're a Christian, then you can do this and this and this, and you can't do that and that and that, then all they have is a caricature of the rules of Jesus that don't really know the nature of the person of Jesus that is the very invitation of what it is that he is wanting to bring to us. So at the top of 135, before we proceed further, we must consider a problem pointed out by both Pascal and Polanyi regarding the joint functioning of the intuitive and mathematical mind, or the implicit and explicit, or the inarticulate and articulate ways of knowing. The functioning of the mathematical mind tends to atrophy the functioning of the intuitive mind. So if all you do is stay in your head, you don't engage the world, which is kind of like being a wallflower at a dance. If you're just sitting there looking at everybody the whole time and thinking you can dance, you have not yet danced. And you even may say, I know how to dance because I've seen people do it. It's like, you do not know how to dance.
Right.
Right? So there is a coherence that needs to come together. So the last sentence in that paragraph, hence the crucial point in science must have to do with the intersection of the informal and the formal, the implicit and the explicit, the specifiable and the unspecifiable factors. We have to let reality be reality and our language be our language and let it point to it without thinking we've captured it, grasped it, or conquered it. That is the point we have to do with the transcendental role of wisdom in science. It opens us up to see the complexity of the world or persons we indwell so that the knowledge we have is a true knowledge, but it's firstly a personal knowledge and only secondarily a kind of an objective knowledge. Right? That's what wisdom does.
And it's always potentially incomplete.
And always potentially incomplete.
Yeah.
Which is why I say to couples, if every day you sat down at your table and said, I know who you were yesterday, tell me who you are today. What are you looking forward to? I don't want to assume that today is like yesterday, that we'd have much more vibrant relationships with the assumption of, I don't know, and I want to be in touch with you today. That would be a truer wisdom of knowing that person in an ongoing kind of way. And that leads into the next part, the recognition of order. You might recognize that every day that person says, well, I just love coffee in the morning. And I just love to sit here, and I'd love to hear this kind of music. And there may be days where it's like, you know what? No coffee today. I want something else. I want orange juice. But you would recognize that within the order that has come, that's a deviation. That's a possible deviation, but not a necessary. And so you wouldn't say, well, I'll just give you orange juice from now on. It's like, no, that's just today. I want orange juice today. So to recognize what the realm of the possibilities are, to see them in it, now you're getting to know the person, right? So the recognition of order, the transcendental role of wisdom in science is nowhere more evident than in our basic concept of order. So order is something that, again, comes as a gift to us. We recognize that there's something there. And we recognize that that other that is there is the ground of reality, the ground of order. And so, as he says about the sixth line up from the bottom, belief in order, the conviction that whatever may appear to the contrary of so-called random events, reality is finally and intrinsically orderly. And we're just recognizing the gift of what is there and beginning to see patterns that come with it, like the sun going up and going down is a pattern, right? And so we learn to relate to the world in the light of that. That is
Now,
why. But
this is, I agree with you. I agree this is very fundamental, but this is, I think, one area where modernity has started to become uncertain.
mm,
That the chaotic nature of, like, especially human society,
yes,
the wars of the 20th century and injustice in the world today is
yes,
making us feel, maybe there isn't an order. Maybe things are random.
yeah,
Maybe it's just, there is no meaning, right?
yeah,
And so this is part of the kind of the
yeah.
issue with abandoning truth seeking.
Disintegration,
Yes,
the
exactly.
disintegration of our sense of order. And I would only kind of point out that it's a really good point that that is where we are going. But to use the beginning of the article of the chapter of Mere Christianity, Lewis says, we know that it's chaos because we have a sense of what the orderliness of good would look like, right? It's one of
Yes.
his arguments for God is that we wouldn't feel the world was becoming chaotic were there not a sense of order that represents the nature of exactly what I think, particularly Augustine and Pascal are representing
Hmm.
here.
Yeah.
Right? It's the intuitive, deeper dimensions of what it is that's going on. So the
I
nature
think
of
this,
rest. Go ahead.
and I think this refers to Bill's comment about how some of the churches are growing and some of the churches are losing members.
Yep, yep,
And it may be what
Yeah.
characterizes the ones that are growing is that they do have a sense of order,
yep,
Yes.
that the traditions that they have are being upheld in the face of this onslaught that says, no, there is no absolute truth, right?
yep, yep.
So,
Hmm.
I think that's true. Part of the nature of modern psychology is it deals with disorders. It doesn't deal that well with orderliness. It really doesn't give us the resources for healthy relationships and all that, partly because
hmm
it assumes the individual, the psychology of an individual is the
hmm
focal point of what it calls science. And so to say the nature of theology, to say, no, we only exist in relationship and the patterns of our relationship when they reflect the nature of the love of God who gives, who sends, who embraces, that there's something there that is a different foundation that, in a sense, psychology hasn't really built its basis on the wisdom of that way of being, and therefore keeps fracturing and not knowing why, as it is forces individuals to position with one another without actually getting the relationship that is necessary to really move forward in that sense.
hmm Yeah.
And I could go on that for hours, but I won't. So the on page 136 then, where does the sentence begin? We'll just begin with the second line down from the top. Order characterizes the inherent nature of transcendent reality and bears upon our minds with such a categorical authority that we find ourselves under a transcendent obligation to be true and faithful to its claims, which is the whole sense we were just talking about of the chaos versus orderliness. It is cognitive reference to the imperative of an ultimate ground of rational order in this way, God, both as a sufficient reason for our compulsive belief in order and as an extrinsically regulating principle in all scientific ordering of knowledge. Everything seems to have this order. That is the elusive transcendental rule of wisdom and what we call the scientific conscience or the scientific instinct. And so to say all scientists have some sense there's something here to be learned and I'm going to learn it. It's not something that's like, I'll never learn this. If you do that, you can't be a scientist. If you just give up before you even begin. And those who say, well, I had somebody once say to me, I just don't believe in imaginary friends, knowing that I was a theologian. And it was basically saying there isn't enough reality in what you do that I could even inquire into it. And so that's a non scientific consciousness. I can't even begin to explore what you might believe or why you would believe that. So again, faith seeking understanding is building a scientific or a faithful scientific consciousness based on the faithfulness of God to create a world that explores and discerns the nature of God and the world that God creates and our place within it. which is basically the definition of what systematic theology was told to me to be on my first day of systematic theology 1 with Neil Plantinga, brother of Cornelius, brother of
Alvin?
Alvin. Yes, thank you. Alvin, by the way, was one of the lecturers at this conference. But Neil was his brother. Alvin Plantinga borrowed my bicycle when I was in New Zealand. He came and did a speaking gig there, and he borrowed my bicycle to go there. So that's my connection to Alvin Plantinga. I did get to hear him when he was there too. But so the idea then, how many lines down? That is to say, is about right in the middle. That is to say, in a strange way, the ultimate ground of order is known in not being known, or known only in an apophatic or subsidiary way as the comprehensive presupposition for both our understanding of any or all order and for our obligation to discover and be obedient to the truth. Now that's a mouthful.
Yeah.
So there's a sense in which the world that can be known, there is much that is not known. I mean, the fact that Einstein discovered relativity when he did, it's like all those centuries we went by. And from the time that the Babylonians studied the stars to when they began to actually figure out what was there just with planets and the Earth at the center, there's still much that is not known, but there is much that we do know, and we come to know the unknown through that which is given in the known. And then once we know what is true, to be obedient to the truth is to act in a way that acknowledges that that is the nature of reality. So not jumping off tall buildings is to recognize gravity is destructive on human bodies, if not mediated by some form of support that keeps them going. So being obedient to the truth is to live in the world that God gives us, where our intuition guides us into wisdom as to how then to relate to that world. So here's again the interface of that. Without it, everything would be meaningless, purposeless, and pointless. That's the wisdom is gone at that point then. Hence, it is not sufficient to claim that the intellectual cognition of eternal things belongs to the sapientia only, and the rational cognition of temporal things belongs to scientia. We need them both in every case. Faith needs science, and science needs faith. There's a necessary contribution that each makes to the other. Going down to the next section, then, the discernment of unity, to see that there are all of these things that we think about, we engage reality, we become rational about reality, we intuit and act in relationship to it. The discernment of unity, and just to say, discernment's where we started at the beginning, right? Wisdom kind of gives us the discernment. So when there isn't wisdom, then you can't see the unity. When there isn't sapientia, then science can't see how things go together. It can only see the many parts. This is the critique of Aristotle, right? If Plato saw everything just as somewhere else abstract in the form that is not really reality here, Aristotle broke everything to parts. And Newton, at some level, was still living in a world where we only saw everything in parts. And so the move beyond Newton that Torrance is often going to point to is to see once again the world as a unity with particular parts, but seen in their relativity, which is a very correspondent with the nature of Einstein's work. Yep.
To be fair to Newton, though, he did unify terrestrial motion with celestial motion. So, he did take a step towards unification, maybe not far enough, but still.
He didn't get to the theory of relativity, I guess, is part of it. And I haven't studied Einstein. I mean, I haven't studied Newton on the nature of how he understood what it means to be persons. One can see where you would think of the human with their body and brain, that there's something about the individuality of that, in almost in a Da Vinci kind of way, with the human with its physical and all its structures are individualized. The nature of what Torrance is going to talk about in onto-relational thinking is the science of seeing the interrelatedness of our personal being. And if we don't get that, then we are operating as something that is insufficient with a wisdom to see beyond the mere physical factor and to see into the dynamic of what is truly there in persons as persons in relation, and really unified within that, and where community, the nature of church community, isn't just a bunch of people sitting in their egg holders. They're not just in the same space at the same time. They are one giant omelet. Necessarily mixed together, or they're just a bunch of eggs in their places and they're not actually the church.
Right.
They're just in
Right.
their carton. And again, just going back to the question you raised, why is the Orthodox? I think Orthodoxy, I haven't been in Orthodox services enough, but I have a sense that the community gathers in a particular way in an Orthodox community that has an interrelatedness that is not the same as sitting in pews, because they don't have pews. And
I
so
guess
just the
some do, most
some do.
Well, I'll put it this way: the few I've been to do have pews. In America, I don't know about they're ethnical, ethnic,
Ethnic.
Greek
We can
Orthodox.
make up words here. It's okay. We have room for that.
Antiochian is probably the Orthodox branch that, if I can call it that, which is not right, but I will, that has more converts, those that have come over from elsewhere.
Hmm.
The
Yeah.
Greeks are ethnic. I told you I attended a Greek function,
Yeah.
the Orthodox Church there, and that lady turned to me and said, "You don't look Greek. You're
You
not
look Greek
Greek."
to me.
No. What did she say? She said, "You're not Greek." I said, "No." She says, "But you look Greek," or something like that.
Okay.
I don't know. I can't remember it now. But anyway, they're ethnic.
She was using her intuitions and
Now,
her reasoning as to what Greeks look like and do, and trying to
But
figure
they're-
how to figure you out.
but beautiful people, lovely to
Yeah.
be around them.
Yeah, but you're raising, I think, interesting questions just into the nature of worship and why people are drawn to the nature of the community and its forms of worship and the solidity of its belief system and what that presents in its gatherings and all that. I think they're all important outcomes of.
The divine liturgy is just, to me, is amazing.
Yeah.
That's the only reason I went, is because of what Torrance said.
Yeah.
It's the most biblical form of worship. I said, well, I'd like to see it.
Yeah.
So,
So, beginning then the discernment of unity, whatever else it is, wisdom is the capacity for sound judgment arising out of a direct intuitive apprehension of an elemental bond between humanity and the cosmos as a whole, and of a liaison between the cosmos as a whole and the unitary transcendent ground of all reality. I don't know if Torrance really wanted people to sit and munch on these sentences for hours or not, but there's a lot packed into this sentence. Like, okay, I get it, but really?
Yeah, that's
So
the impression
wisdom,
I have whenever I read Torrance. Is like some of these paragraphs are like, what? I have to read it again and again.
read it again and again. And it comes, but it's like, it shouldn't have to be quite that hard. I work at trying to get sentences where I just read it and go, somebody should be able to get that in one read and say, that's good.
Yeah.
So
Well-
the holding of together, so wisdom and the unity of all things need to be seen as a coherent statement. If it has wisdom, it has unity. If it doesn't have unity, it's lost a dimension of what wisdom looks like. And we're not
Yeah,
seeing how it fits within. Go ahead.
Yeah, at first, when I saw the word unity, I thought he was talking about unity across dimensions. The unity of science is all one,
Right.
biology, chemistry, etc. But now in this sentence, he's talking about the vertical unity,
Yes.
the cosmos and us as humans, and then the
Exactly.
underlying reality, the deeper level of unity. That's,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. The stratification of knowledge would be another way to talk about that.
Hmm.
Torrance is the three levels and maybe more, and all the uses of strata that Carey uses with geology to say, to really get the story of what's going on with this particular geological feature, we have to see all of the strata, and the
Mhm.
unity of that is at
Mhm.
some level what's going on here with the divine and the created world, so to speak.
Mhm.
So on 137, he brings us to Einstein at the top, first sentence, full sentence at the top. This has been particularly evident in recent years in the tension between general relativity theory, which describes the universe of space and time as a continuous whole, and quantum theory, which is concerned with the description of subatomic events and processes underlying all physical reality as discontinuous. However, quantum theory has also been showing us that every single particle in the microworld and the macroworld is ultimately inseparable from the whole universe, within which all particles resonate with one another. So that relativity theory and quantum theory have been moving into synthesis. And I think you would call that wisdom, right? But it's our perception. It was there. We haven't done anything to change it. It's just that we're gaining insight in our discovery process to say, oh, we missed this. We're not attentive. And so to recognize from a God perspective, the one that made it all probably made it to work together with all of its distinguishing features. Much of it unknowable without, accessibility that's not available to everyone. I have not visited the macro world very much.
And
So,
what year did he write this essay?
the first form of it in French was 1990.
Okay.
This was presented in 1992, I think it was.
Okay.
And the book was published in 96.
Thanks.
Yeah, this sentence is to me very poetic
Oh,
because it's not quite scientific, right? It's pre-scientific. Like when he says that the particles resonate with one another,
Yep.
I don't think he's talking about actual harmonics between electrons across the universe, but still that there is a connection, underlying
Yes.
connection somehow. And then the synthesis between quantum theory and relativity,
yeah.
we still don't have it. Okay.
Yeah.
That is the biggest open question that all physics this community is addressing, that
Yeah.
they're trying to synthesize it, but it just isn't happening. So
Well, it's
Yeah.
have been moving into synthesis. That's still troubling? Have been moving is the way you
there are
write.
a lot of
been moving.
approaches, but no approach
Yeah.
is satisfactory.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the nature of, using the word poetic is to say poetry is when heart meets with words that are descriptive, it creates poetry.
Yes.
And it's true to the nature of something, and it's expressed in the most adequate but still inadequate words that we have available.
That's right.
To
That's
allow
right.
you to get the intuitive perception. And that's what good poetry does. And sometimes things can only be said poetically.
Yes.
You do see something, and that is part of what it is that he's aiming for in this.
Yeah,
the role of
because
wisdom in science is exactly what you just said.
Yeah, because poetry recognizes the inadequacy of articulation, of things that are inarticulable, right? You're attempting to articulate it, but
Yes.
you do it in a poetic way because you recognize this is not complete. This is just as opposed to the scientific says we have these concepts and we can say it, with a certain degree of confidence, even in science, it's always there is always that underlying um, ground, which is sort of informal, right? As he says earlier, that
Yeah.
no word has its own definition embedded in it.
That's
It's
right.
always in the context of things. Yeah.
Yeah. And other words with it help adjust those contexts. So in the next paragraph, there are undoubtedly different forms of rational order in the universe that require for their understanding to articulate appropriate and distinctive modes of rationality. That's the many contexts or modes that we might have. And so a few sentences down, these basic modes of rationality demanding recognition have to do with number, word, organism, and beauty. And so again, they're points of views, modes with which we engage the world to try and get, but each in a distinctive way. So science learns the distinctives and keeps discovering distinctives, and sometimes has to use poetry because it can see it, but it can't capture it like a butterfly. but it's still there. And then the last sentence, we coordinate these different modes of rationality then, not through connecting them immediately up with one another, but immediately through referring them back to the one ultimate ground of rationality, the transcendent order upon which they all rest and upon which the whole universe is finally contingent. So here's the ultimate divine and contingent order that, it is created orderly, and we have the wisdom to discern it and can live and function in the world with that purpose.
And Brian Cox would call this naturalistic contingency.
Okay.
Right? Is that the word he uses? Naturalistic contingency? Anyway, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too far.
Okay. The top of 138. Thus, here we fall back upon the transcendental mode of wisdom in science, even though the kind of reference it calls for is not one that we can ever express in logical terms, far less one in which idealized forms of our human rationality may be read back into their transcendent ground. And that footnote there is to one of the 12 books that we read earlier this year, Puttyfoot's book on logic. So he then transfers over to Faraday and Maxwell at this point. And the nature of their work in seeing wholes against systems, the nature of electromagnetic theory for Maxwell, the whole and the parts instead of from the parts to the whole. So again, this is just a relatively simple move, but in a sense, it changes everything. If you start with parts, it's hard to get to the whole with merely the combination of all the parts. Whereas if you can see the whole, then you can begin to discern the nature of the parts. And I think that's what doctors have to do with human bodies, is they have to see the whole and not just the part, or else things go poorly. About halfway.
Torrance really likes James Clerk Maxwell.
He really does, as does Bruce Ritchie, who
he edited a book, right, containing Maxwell's early papers.
And he did. On electromagnetic theory, yep.
Yes, and it's so he really appreciates Maxwell's insights and his Christian faith playing into the relational idea of the field.
Yes.
The field concept, which is amazing.
And apparently Faraday was quite a Christian as well, and builds concepts that are also helpful in those ways.
Yeah, Faraday is the paradigmatic example of the experimental physicist. He was just amazing at the number of experiments he was able to do and gather all this data. And then somebody like Clerk Maxwell comes along and is able to see all of that and says, mathematically, you can reduce all of this to these 4 equations. It's like, wow. But without Faraday, Clerk Maxwell wouldn't have been able to do any of that.
Yeah.
And without Maxwell, I wonder about Einstein.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I have heard exactly that.
Yep.
So there's the contingent. I mean, that's a beautiful picture of contingencies, each exploring reality and each building on others in a contingent kind of way that keeps developing. And, someday I'm hoping people say, what Marty Folsom did in the world of personal relations was the Einsteinian move in the world of what it means to be humans, that we had lost a sense of what that looks like and just set the personal aside. So we needed to recover the field of the personal. So anyway, just so you know what my dreams are. On 138, halfway down the page, the sentence, that was very evident in the epistemological revolution brought about by general relativity theory, which demolished the radical dualism between absolute mathematical time and space and relative apparent time and space built into Newton's system of the world and brought into question by the sharp division between the how and the why introduced into Western thought by the Enlightenment. So anyway, that's an important sentence just to say it was an epistemological revolution. How we know what we know was significant, and the why things are the way they are, and the contingency came into play in a way that had not been there before. The nature of field theory, with Einstein using it, claims that in order to penetrate into the ultimate core of nature's secrets, one must not only know how nature is, what it is, but how it progresses, its processes take place, but why nature is what it is and not something else, which is another one of the statements that came out of one of the 12 books, that it's not just why is there something rather than nothing, but why is there this something rather than nothing, is that is the contingency piece that then takes us into the question of God. The implications of this is that the universe of things is ordered in such a contingent way that no thing exists in its own right, but with all other things in the universe owes its existence and nature to a transcendent reality. That's just a few lines down. So there's this whole laying a foundation then that now we have field theory. We still have the divisions that now are brought together. The particular and the general are brought together in unified theory. And so now in 139, he jumps into the ethical dimension. How then do we live with this scientific consciousness? Well, we have a wisdom that allows us to see the world as it is, but to see that our interrelationship with why things are the way they are, that we develop something which he calls, it's about 10 lines up, conscientia, conscience, con with knowing, it's knowing with. So to say the nature of conscience is in a sense wisdom and science being brought together, right? And so you could see it as individualized, oh, you have no conscience. But to say that, as Torrance is using it here, there is a scientific consciousness that is a thinking together with other scientists and with God. It is a coming together, a working together that allows us to see what it is that can be seen. So in each scientist shares with his fellow scientists in a worldwide community of science, accepted standards of truth and falsity consistent with the body, universally established knowledge, but in it, he also shares with his colleagues the informal, regulative, intuitive contact with the unintelligible nature of reality, which he and they acknowledge as the ultimate judge of truth and falsity. It was Einstein's recognition of the primacy of the latter over the former that lay behind many of his striking appeals to what he called God, a point to which we'll return later. So in this all, with intuitive ability in the world, we have this capacity for moral because we can choose the false and the not, what is false and what is true. And from that, he's also going to suggest that we can choose what is right and what is wrong. On 140 in the bottom paragraph, where am I going to start? About halfway, a little above halfway up the bottom paragraph. However, if physical and moral law have a unitary ontological ground beyond themselves, they must also be locked together in the compelling claims that lay upon us. This is already apparent in the fact that in all inquiry in natural and moral science, we are obliged to respect, know, and act toward realities of whatever kind, strictly in accordance with their nature in a true and faithful way, and not otherwise. For true knowledge, and not false, and right behavior, not wrong behavior, are both responses to the imperious constraint of a single transcendent reality, which we cannot rationally or morally resist. That is surely an essential part of what we mean by conscience, scientific or moral. So we are shaped in a world, we're shaped in communities, we acknowledge that which is real, that which is not, and then how to live in response to it. So in 141, then, the ethical dimension, he is going to go into some Polanyian concepts. I literally drew a little picture based on Polanyi's work, where he says one of the ways in which Polanyi expounds this point is through contrasting knowing by attending to and knowing attending from, to show that when we focus our attention exclusively on something itself, such as a word, we find that it tends to lose its semantic reference and thus we miss its meaning. So I drew a little box and I wrote the word in it. And then I drew a little arrow back to the word. And so that's to say, that's what we do when we just have a word and it just goes back to itself. It's not doing anything. And then out of the bottom, I drew a line with an arrow on it going out, refer. This word refers to that reality. when the wisdom of the word is brought in, it's no longer just science with a word that means what that word is. And we don't say, well, we don't know how it connects to reality. It's the word, it's the sign. The Polanyian move here of whatever we have to allow the reference to be there to which our words refer, or they lose the wisdom, the intuitive wisdom to actually understand a sentence or a word. And therefore we can't do science because it's been fractured at the very point of what should be the point of meeting. So if we take the word universe and put it in there and just refer back, universe, see the universe. you just look back. But if it's universe, what are we referring to here? Well, we're referring to something that God says that God has created. Oh, it has creation. Well, is there order to it? Yes, that's Genesis 1. It's an orderly word. Well, for what purpose is this order made? It's made for humans to be covenant partners with God. Oh, and so there comes then reference. Our words take on a wisdom kind of meeting that allows science to do the work that it needs to do to bring meaning, contexts, and that our words actually take us places into that process of discovery. That was kind of fun just drawing that little thing going. I think I'm starting to get semantic reference. For some reason, the word semantic reference in the page just was not doing it. I had to literally draw the picture to go, oh, I think I get what he means now. Top of 142. Everything depends, however, on the nature of the semantic reference, and you can see how quickly it becomes important at the boundary condition of the universe where it is open to meaningful interpretation beyond itself. So now our words, our language, our investigation is all open to the beyond. Here we may helpfully turn to James Clerk Maxwell's development of the analogy of cause. He argues we cannot grasp the relation of the universe to any reality beyond itself through extending the mechanism of causal connections that obtain within the universe itself, for there are limits beyond which physical, scientific inquiry cannot go. So if everything is cause and effect, which is the whole necessity of things cause and effect that you hear Torrance and Kerry Magruder saying, and we can't do the cause and necessity things because it limits things within something that we can grasp and we hold on to and we think that we've controlled it. So this breaks out of that and says that there's something about the intelligibility of the universe that requires intuitive readings of what's going on, the nature of the orderliness that's there, and that even the morality of things that we do within it, they're not just mechanical acts with no personal dimensions. The nature of our involvement in the world has a moral dimension to it. They were created for purposes, and we stay within those to align with the nature of the care of all things. And I'm jumping over to 143. The last, or the full sentence, 4 lines down at the top of 143. For Clerk Maxwell himself, the central cause or focus of reference was identified with the active agency of God, the creator of the universe, and the originating source of all its rational and moral order. Thus, the semantic reference of the universe at its boundary conditions where it is open to interpretation beyond itself was found by him to be not logico-causal, although certainly rational, but to be of a distinctly moral and personal kind. The universe seemed to reveal that the reference was to God. And then the next sentence in the paragraph below, now that seems to me to be the real import of the anthropic principle, along with observer physics and meaning physics, namely the recognition that the universe in its astonishing, improbable, but effective laws bears the hallmarks of a personal author.
Yes.
So
the universe doesn't make sense like a machine.
That's right.
Sense, it makes sense like a message from a person.
Yeah. So here we have, the originating point for how we do science and theology has been reasoned by Maxwell here to say it seems to require that. And even in the next paragraph down, the anthropic principle means more than that there is a real analogy between the constitution of the human intellect and the rational constitution of the universe around it, so that humanity has arisen within the universe as its one constituent member, whereby the universe knows itself. So to say the nature of the universe, we were made to know it, and there's no way the universe knows itself other than our knowing of it. This is Torrance's priests of creation. We are the ones that were created by God, not just the universe, to know the universe. And none of the other parts of the universe that we have seen, other than certain science fiction movies, are able to interpret it because they weren't made to do that. Right? But we are made to know it and the one who made it. If that makes sense to you. Bottom of that page. All of this is to say that the real import of the anthropic principle is not only that the universe is a home for humanity, but that the personal nature of humankind belongs to the very nature of nature, and that it calls upon us to recognize that the universe owes its existence, nature, and structure to a personal author infinitely greater than we could ever conceive, to God, the Creator. He goes on to talk for several pages about Einstein and the nature of all of his analogies of God, and that at some level they require intuitive sensitivities. They require a sense of wisdom. There's all kinds of things. He says he's hinting at all the things we've been talking about here. Even Einstein recognized that in the scientific, the sapiential is something that is present and needs to be acknowledged.
Spinoza.
And I'm looking for here, yeah. So footnote 30 there. And again, he says of the scientist, his religious feeling takes the form of a rapturous amazement at the harmony of natural law, which reveals an intelligence of such superiority that, compared with it, all systematic thinking and acting of human beings is an utterly insignificant reflection. The footnote 30 that's there, if you read footnote 30, he gives quotes of where it comes from, but he talks about an interview with somebody and quotes Einstein saying, this is Einstein, Jesus is too colossal for the pen of phrasemongers, however artful. No one can dispose of Christianity with a bon mot. No one can read the Gospels without feeling the actual presence of Jesus. His personality pulsates in every word. No myth is filled with such life.
I've not seen that before.
Yes. So again, this is Torrance quoting from people who I think. So anyway, I found that to be quite fascinating. Shall we say? So the nature of his appeal here to Einstein as he approaches the end of this, at the top of 145, the distinctively personal apperception of God deriving from Hebrew wisdom was more definitely and effectively at work in the scientific mind and soul of Michael Polanyi, nowhere more evident than in his insistence that it is only the person who is capable of objective scientific operations and of discerning the regulative role of transcendent reality in the premises of science. So, I mean, he's attributing that to Polanyi. Again, when you see Hebrew wisdom showing up, John McMurray wrote about the Hebrew apperception decades before. And so anyway, it's part of my argument that Polanyi was influenced by McMurray, and this is just an example of that. All of it to say they're all working together and seeing things. I mean, I always see team, I don't see any one. It's part of that contingency piece that I want to see them all together. And Torrance now is taking McMurray, Polanyi, and bringing to a close in this article that the wisdom that transcends us is the wisdom of God, and science's very meaning and purpose functions best as understood as the outworking of the wisdom of God in the world as humans who understand God and the world and bring those things together in ways that are both intuitive and rational and provide for us the ability to say things that are true and right and to live truly and rightly with God, first of all, the one who makes it all, and to live in the light of it. So the last paragraph, maybe it's the last sentence. Here, sapientia and scientia are harnessed together. There that is, in such a way that wisdom is found to exercise a heuristic and transcendental role. That's the ongoing discovery in science, while also exercising a theological restraint upon any simplistic way of reading back our human formulations of rational and moral law into God. How fitting it was for scientific research when, in his conviction that the worlds were framed through the wisdom of God, James Clerk Maxwell had carved on the door of the great Cavendish laboratory in the University of Cambridge the words of the ancient psalm. And in English, it's footnote 36, great are the works of the Lord. They are pondered by all who delight in them. And Bill, that was your word that you used, pondered.
Yeah, that's the NIV. I was surprised to see NIV down there.
Yeah,
When
I was
Torrance-
surprised to see
Huh?
that too. I was too.
Well, I
Instead
like
of the Revised Standard or something like that.
yeah, the King James is what is it? All those sought out by all who delight in him. Not, but I like ponder better.
Ponder is good.
Ponder is good. Ponderation,
Yes.
great ponderation.
So was that helpful?
Yeah, I thought it was challenging for me. I don't know about you guys, but
Yeah. And that's why I call them, they're hidden for, I mean, this was hidden because it was really for a very academic audience, but it's full of, I think, really helpful insights, but it's best to be read together. So next week,
Yeah, I'm wondering what are the other papers in that volume
next
dealing
week
with?
we're going to look at the other one by T.F. Torrance, and it's entitled Ultimate and Penultimate Beliefs in Science.
Okay.
Okay. But just to say that in this is volume 1, so there's part 1 and part 2. And so part 1 is historiography, so religious belief and the natural sciences mapping the historical landscape. Another one, the importance of eliminating science and religion from the history of science, the cases of Oliver Lodge, people who attempted to do that. Number 3, interpreting Michael Faraday as the Christian philosopher, some problems regarding metaphysics, and on we go with ones in that mold. The second one, modes of interaction and their general features. So the first one in this was Aquinas on faith and science. Then the one we just looked at, the second one we'll look at next week, ultimate and penultimate beliefs in science. And then Alvin Plantinga's methodological naturalism is the fourth one. Christopher Kaiser, who we've had on the reading group before, his is scientific work and its theological dimension toward a theology of natural science. And on we go with other people in modes of interaction and their general features. The second volume, the role of belief in mathematics and natural sciences, an Augustinian perspective. And it also has it has 3 parts to it. So anyway, so there's four volumes in the series. The fourth one, interpreting God's actions in the world. And it includes theistic interpretations. And it has one by Christopher Kaiser also, The Laws of Nature and the Nature of God is one example there. And then the final section of the 4 volumes, The Role of Scripture in Science. The first one is written by Clark Pinnock, An Interactive Theory of the Relation between Science and Scripture. So anyway, that's a quick overview of the series.
Interesting. This center, Pascal Center?
I think it doesn't exist anymore, but at the time it did, and go ahead.
Okay. I was just curious what they've been doing.
Carrie Magruder can give a very detailed outline of the history of it, how it came into being, the funding that they brought to put this, what he considered really wonderful conference together, and then the loss of money within not that much time, so that it was a really unique opportunity.
Marty,
Yes.
Marty, could I just say, I just ask quickly the significance of the sort of paper for these papers for, or the fallout from these papers for non-professional audiences, as it were, because I had a slight worry that, namely this, that the Pascalian language of head and heart could actually default or devolve into kind of dualistic, simplistic, anthropocentric language, in which there's an inversion or a complete falsification of the, or misdirection of the whole tenor of the piece, or of scientific theology. And I'm not saying this to upset the apple cart, because my apple cart is already upset, kind of even surmising that audiences, as it were, will come away, or anybody on the perimeter of this material could easily come away with dualistic notions. In other words, are very contrary to the whole setup that we have here. And what have you got at the end of this exhausting session? Is there anything, am I being stupid about it, or is there something cautionary that needs to be underlined here, so that either that people don't go away like this, or is it all just in my mind that can construe such simplification that's going in the wrong direction?
Well, to say that humans are going to be confused by theology and science is probably just a truism. To say that we'd love to either turn things into big ideas or some practical project that we do is also kind of in the water. People, they don't really want to see the whole picture and the complexities that all of these things lead into. So to say the nature of Torrance is difficult, and some people say, oh, he's too heady, he never gets, practical. And they're just saying it's all head and no heart. But then the others just say, what are you talking about? And they write books and they do participatio editions on the practical ethics of T.F. Torrance. So to say people want to understand, and to do that, it is often easier to break things apart that ought not to have been broken apart. And this article is specifically aimed at trying to hold them together. The authors who were referred to had language that they intended to be held together. His conclusions from them, though, that we can recognize that order has particularity, but we've got to hold it together. So unity is seeing the many parts of the whole. So I think he's trying to say, Tim, I hear you decades down the road. People are going to break things apart. I'm trying to put it out there to say it all holds together, and God is the source.
Yeah, but
you good with that? Yeah, I mean, we live in a world where people go to make money because they think that money will buy them happiness, but they don't know how to build relationships. And so they're replacing relationships with experiences and other things that don't engage them with the people often who are sitting right next to them. So we live in a world that is so profoundly divided just between what our heart would do if we just learned to love each other would be profound. And to not just see we need to manage our world and money and having a house that's going to answer all of everything we need. And so the work that Torrance is doing, that I'm trying to do, and that these conversations lead to, is to say the problem of human sin is that it breaks everything apart. The gospel puts everything back together.
Having a house and a roof over my head was 90% of solving all my problems.
We want that too, but to say the problems of humanity require that we get the realignment that I think Torrance is aiming for. The individuals need houses and food. But there is this bigger picture where we don't end up destroying each other because we're so fighting for our own place within it that we can't see who God is in it or who each other is, and we end up just isolated. Or C.S. Lewis's Hell in The Great Divorce, where everybody keeps moving further and further away from one another. And you can go and visit. I can't remember who it is. He says you can. I don't think it was Pascal, but it was somebody on the far reaches of the universe. That hell is just this. It's not a place of torture. It's just everybody's just continuing the movement away from each other. And
Well,
we already
maybe
live
that's
in a
why.
kind of hell then.
Yeah. Maybe C.S. Lewis is the important bridge between the popular imagination and this material, this kind of material.
Lewis is very helpful for, I think, for many of these things. That is definitely true. I became a Christian because of the Chronicles of Narnia, and they brought another world into focus and a God who sees the practice of loving and working in that world, even in the face of evil that enters into it, brings restorative dimensions all over the place. So Lewis is, for me, one of my favorites at giving us visions in ways that are different. But I still love T.F. Torrance because I think he gets deeply into the rootedness of it all that's helpful for us. Well, I'm going to call that a day if that's okay with you. I'll post the second essay for next week, and we'll take a look at that next week. I'm trying to decide whether I will be doing the next scientific theology chapter, and then it'll be Jerome Van Kyken will close us out. I have a couple other things to fill in here. If you have something you want to look at, Tim has requested doing something of, what's his name? It went out of my head. T.F. Torrance and sociology. Eric Flett. So I'm going to try and get an Eric Flett article in before we end up here. And then in August, we'll be starting with T.F. Torrance's book, Karl Barth, Biblical and Evangelical Theologian. So there's the news of upcoming events. Thank you guys for being here today. I enjoyed it for one. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for organizing.
Thank you, Marty.
Bye.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Bye, Tim. Bye, Young Ale.
Bye.